Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I hope we're not going to go all stuttery again today. So if someone could look in and let me know that the audio is coming over clearly, I'd be grateful. What have we got for you today in the show? Well, quite a packed show again. It's Elevenses 343. It's Sunday the 18th of June. And here's what's in today's news. The Spanish and Danish authorities have cooperated in arresting 5 motorcyclists in connection with drugs trafficking. Hero Motor Corp are being investigated for a diversion of funds. A new website captures every bike crash for the last 10 years, and we'll come back to that and show you how useful that can be. Police in the UK have been trialling the Energica's conversion of a patrol bike. The Honda electric moped that I've talked about in previous shows is going on sale in Japan. The Kimco Taiwanese company is working on some rearward-facing radar. They've released a patent. And a new bobber has appeared from Bender. And we'll also have a quick look at a bike I forgot to mention, the Cyclone 650 from Zhongsheng. Now, stay with me while we deal with all that, and then finally we'll get to today's discussion point, which is actually quite an interesting and quite an important one, which is all about Warwickshire's crash reduction schemes. I'll be looking at the logic behind their rider safety posters, and I'm pretty much going to conclude that there isn't actually any logic in putting those up. So hopefully the audio is coming over clearly. We had a bit of a stuttery music start. That's unfortunate because the music obviously attracts people to listen to the rest of the show, and if that's not working well, then it's not good for viewers. Right, anyway, first of all, just a word about the weather. If you are planning to be out on the bike later, big storms are expected to be moving across central England and parts of Wales today, moving west northwest as the day goes on through the afternoon and into the evening, and it looks like there'll also be more risk of thunderstorms across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland tomorrow, so keep an eye open for that. Gusty winds, torrential downpours, obviously all this can lead to flash flooding as well as hail and gusty winds, and this is the sort of thing that you can expect. This was actually London, just a couple of miles away. Now, the interesting thing, of course, about storms is that they can be all around us, and we can actually miss it where we are. So this happened, as I say, just a few days ago. This is the bottom of the M1. You may have seen the full video on Twitter. There was flooding all around us, and believe it or not, rather less than 2 miles away from where this photo was taken, we had barely a drop of rain, not enough even to make the patio damp. Right, so on with the show and on with the news. Now, in a joint operation, the Spanish and Danish authorities have arrested 5 individuals said to be members of, or aspiring members of, a criminal organisation linked to the Hells Angels. And in their coordinated operation, which featured agents from both countries participating in multiple raids, they were taken up. They are also suspects in a number of other crimes, including drug trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, money laundering and corruption. Now, according to the statement released by the Spanish police on Monday, 2 of the suspects were apprehended in Malaga, in Spain. The other 3 were arrested in Denmark. The accused had allegedly slipped 3.5 tons of hashish over the border into Denmark, hidden within shipments of live animals transported by the criminal organisation. The hashish, which was sourced from Morocco, was then distributed on to medium and small scale drug traffickers in Denmark. The operation itself has involved more than 200 law enforcement officers from multiple countries, including Germany, Luxembourg, Netherlands and Austria, and has resulted in the seizure of a number of cars, motorcycles, firearms and electronic devices. Meanwhile, India's Ministry of Corporate Affairs has ordered an investigation to assess Hero MotoCorp's relationship with a third-party vendor in a case related to what was described as the alleged diversion of funds. Now, according to closest source to the government, the investigation has been ordered in the public interest to probe the ownership structure of Hero MotoCorp and whether it actually excuse me, whether it actually controlled the third-party vendor involved. Now, Hero MotoCorp, who are India's largest manufacturer of motorcycles, they said in a statement to Reuters they had not received any communication from the government and couldn't comment. And they were quoted as saying, "We will provide all information if and when it is sought from us by any regulatory authority." The ministry didn't respond to a Reuters email request for a comment either, but it did affect the shares. Hero were down 4.2% in Thursday afternoon stock exchange trading. Now, one of the things that I like to do is to review collision data from time to time. And whilst there's been a crash map online for a number of years, the fact is I've never found it particularly useful because it borrows from Google Maps, and basically what happens is the pins that show you where the crashes are get totally obscured by irrelevant stuff like the pins for points of interest, shops, restaurants, bed and breakfast, all that kind of stuff. So it really does make the crash map rather difficult to use. So when I found this new site, I was quite pleased about it. Here's the link to the old one, that's crashmap.co.uk, and here's the link to the new one, which is collisionplot.co.uk. So have a look at this one when you get a moment. Basically what it does is it filters out all the extraneous stuff, so you get the map and you get the crash locations and nothing else. Now, the basic version is free, as is Crash Map incidentally, and it shows who was involved, as in which vehicles were involved, and who was actually injured in every collision for the last 10 years. Now, the pay for premium access version allows you to dig deeper. You can get the stats 19 data from the DFT, and a single license for the new collision plot costs a fairly reasonable £99 a year actually to get the access to all the tools. That's nothing if you're a corporate user. There's also a single month access for just £9.99, which does actually mean it's fairly affordable by anybody who wants to look at crash data for some particular purpose. And the developer says I've spent a lot of time to make it as user-friendly and clutter-free as possible, and I'd certainly say he's managed that nicely. So I used it to take a look at a Warwickshire poster campaign. And I'll be talking about this in the in-depth section, so stay tuned to that. That's coming up at the end of the show. Right, okay, we've Sue has looked in. Good morning to you, Sue. Hopefully you can hear the audio okay. I did have a bit of a trouble with a stuttering video at the start of the show. Right, so motorcycle industry news then, let's move on to that. Now, one of the things that we've seen is that police forces have been trialling everything from a fuel-celled Bergman to electric tricycles over the last few years. But the Italian brand Energica are currently trialling an Xperia SS9 Plus adventure bike modelled to the UK police forces, which has been modded for police use. It's all to encourage their switch from the internal combustion engine. So let's just have a quick look at the bike. There it is. The bike was apparently developed in partnership with the English electric motorcycle outfit in Norfolk, And MCN has reported it will be trialled by 5 police forces this year, as well as by bike safe teams and the British Transport Police. Now, private companies requiring quick response motorcycles are also interested, and it said that a gas distribution company recently took delivery of a similar machine, although presumably without the police flashing lights and radio up. Now, the running costs and the maintenance requirements are obviously much reduced for an electric bike over a petrol engine bike, and Energy could say that with the cost of the machine it makes the bike advantageous in terms of budget. Now, the other thing they say is that the noiselessness and the torque on offer, quote, an invaluable strategic advantage while patrolling. And they say, of course, it's less polluting in urban environments. Now, there's some disagreement between MCN's performance figures and the ones that Xperia themselves quote on their website, which is where the photo actually came from. So I'll stick with the Modena company's claims. Now, according to Energica, the bike has plenty of performance. The top speed is actually limited to 125 miles per hour, and it has a 0 to 60 time of just 2.8 seconds. Now, torque is predictably a monster 200 newton meters or 148 pound-feet, and the power output is 80 kilowatts or 109 horsepower. Possibly more of interest, of course, is how far it can be ridden before it runs out of juice. And the city range, which I'm inclined to believe is unrealistic, is said to be 261 miles or 420 kilometers. I would discard that. Real life use, the combined range seems to be more accurate for ordinary riding, and that's claimed to be 153 miles or 246 kilometers. And if you go out on a fast run, that's where the extra urban cycle comes in more useful. Then it drops to 123 miles or 198 kilometers. Now, it's still pretty good. And frankly, seeing as I rarely managed 100 miles a day in London when I was couriering, typically I was doing between 75 and 85 miles, and that was it being in the saddle all day, every day. I'm sure that for a sort of a London plod or city centre somewhere else, that would probably be plenty of range. Now, thanks to the range, it does have a big battery, and the battery does contribute to the fairly porky 260 kilograms of mass, and that's before the police add-ons go on. But to put that into perspective, the Ducati Multistrada V4, which Ducati say is a light motorcycle, is actually also a fairly massive 240 kilograms, 529 pounds, when it is fully loaded with fuel. That's before adding any accessories to that bike, so there's not that much disparity. 20 kilos, you will notice it, but it's not that huge. And just in case you're wondering, the draw on the battery created by the additional police electrical equipment is said to be minimal. Now, one bike which doesn't have a particular draw on the battery is Honda's EM1E. It's a moped equivalent electric scooter, and it's now been announced it will go on sale in Japan towards the end of this month, next month rather, start again, before the end of August. We're still in June, aren't we? And the bike will cost around $2,100 in Japanese yen, of course, including all taxes. Now, it is the first electric bike Honda have made available to the domestic market, and Honda expects to sell 3,000 units annually, and frankly, that seems to me to be an astonishingly low target. Now, thanks to the dependence on the swappable battery technology, the range is limited to a maximum of just 53 kilometers on a charge. That's 30 miles. And whilst the battery can be removed and charged at home, it still takes a lengthy 6 hours to charge, which is why there are battery swap stations going up. Now, the other 3 electric bikes that are said to be appearing soon are a Bentley E. That's a rack-fitted motorbike, the Gyro E, which is a 3-wheeled scooter, and the Gyro Canopy E, which is a covered model. And Honda say they aim to be marketing 10 electric motorcycles globally by 2025. Not so long to go. Right, Sue says you can hear me fine. That's good to know. It's just the intro music then. Meanwhile, just in case you're wondering where Suzuki are, you'll notice their internal combustion engine range in the UK has shrunk to almost nothing. Just the two new models coming out this year. It said they're planning to roll out their first electric motorcycle sometime in 2024. I don't have any details of what that might be. And they have plans for 8 models to be hitting world markets by 2030. So I think they've got a bit of catching up to do here. They do expect e-bikes to make up 25% of all their motorcycle sales by that date. Okay, now don't forget, if you are watching this show live, that's great, but if you can't be here live, do remember these shows go out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11, and you can always get them on catch up either on Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, you can find it on my survival skills page on facebook.com, or more easily you can head over to my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK on youtube.com. Don't forget that all important UK at the end, though. Much easier to catch up with the shows over there as they are in their own playlist. Right, now one of the latest safety devices appearing on motorcycles is proximity radar. The leading contenders so far have been developed by Bosch and Continental, and what they do is they warn the rider when there is another vehicle in the rider's blind spot. Now, it's similar to systems which have been in cars for quite some while, but predictably the new tech, even when it's safety oriented and would mostly benefit inexperienced riders, I would guess, and possibly commuters on busy roads. It always turns up on bikes likely to be owned by the riders who need it least. So amongst the machines it's fitted to at the moment are the Ducati Multistrada I've just mentioned, the BMW R1250 GS, the KTM 1290 Adventure, and most recently the Tracer 9 GT Plus from Yamaha, which at least is sort of somewhere in the affordable end of the market. But none of those are learner bikes, none of them are exactly what you would call a city slicker of a machine. So it is good to see that it is starting to appear on less expensive motorcycles, not just the flagship bikes. So the blind spot radar has appeared on one of Piaggio's MP3 three-wheelers, obviously targeted at commuters, and now a patent has appeared in the name of Kymco, a major Taiwanese manufacturer. Now Kymco have been making scooters and a few small motorcycles for a while, but recently they've been branching off into developing their own electronic technology. Now if you want my guess, it's because the established European manufacturers are charging top dollar to license theirs for use. So the bike that was shown in the patent, you can find this online with a bit of a search, it's the KRV 180, which is apparently a 220cc scooter, rather confusingly. The model also comes with traction control and keyless ignition, and it's apparently built around a frame which is more similar to that of a motorcycle, presumably for added stability. Anyway, the rearward mounted radar system appears to warn riders via LED lights integrated into the mirrors. So far so good, but there was an interesting comment that appeared on the Rider Part website. And what they basically said was that you may remember that Kymco is a partner of Livewire, the Harley-Davidson electric motorcycle offshoot. Now, that's important possibly because Livewire is also the manufacturer not only of the Livewire 1, the big bike, but also the recently launched S2 Del Mar middleweight. Those are just starting to roll out at the moment to customers in the US and the UK. But there was also in the growth plan for Livewire an S3 lightweight electric motorcycle, and this was apparently intended primarily for the Asian market. So here's the thought: if Kymco and Livewire are working together, what are the chances of the Kymco technology, the radar assist, finding its way across the Pacific to the US and becoming integrated into maybe the next model of the Livewire 1 and the S2 Del Mar? Possibly even it might find its way into Harley's ICE products. Who knows? With the push towards higher motorcycle primary safety systems, it's not such a wild idea, in my opinion. So there we go. That's something to be thought about. Right, so all right, on to the next section of the show. Don't forget, if you do have any comments, anything you want to say, any feedback, I'm always interested to hear it. Do drop me a line. More than happy to comment. Talking about blind spot radar, here is a motorcycle that will feature it, and this is the Norton-based engine. Now you'll remember that Norton were in the middle of developing a 650 twin motor during the Ghana years. The Chinese manufacturer Zhongshen, they licensed the motor design in 2017, but as the British company ran into more and more serious financial difficulties and was struggling to find cash, the design itself was sold off in toto to Zhongshen, and the first bike that actually appeared around the motor was the Cyclone RS6 Adventure Tourer, and this here is the Cyclone RX 650, and it's a development of the original bike. Now let's start with the motor. It's a liquid cooled V4. It's a liquid cooled 4-valve double overhead cam 650, and it's an inline twin. It produces 71 horsepower, which is about 52 kilowatts at 8,500 RPM, so it's not too revvy. And it's got peak torque of 62 Newton meters or 42 pounds-feet at 7,000 RPM. The 6-speed gearbox gets a slipper clutch, and there are 4 riding modes plus traction control. Now the bike is built around a steel tube frame. It gets an aluminium double tube swinging arm, connected to KYB inverted front forks and a rear monoshock, J-Huan brakes, and Pirelli Angel GT tyres on the cast wheels, which are 120/17 and 160/17 front and rear respectively. The fuel tank is 20 litres. No overall weight is quoted, although the early Cyclone RX6 did weigh in at 245 kilograms fueled up. That's fairly porky, to be perfectly honest, and even a fraction heavier than that Multistrada V4 I mentioned a moment ago. Top speed is likely to be around 115 miles per hour. The bike gets twin full LED lights under that electronically adjustable screen. There's a colour TFT screen that offers Bluetooth connectivity, and that goes to the now usual navigation and mobile apps, but you also get tyre pressure monitoring. Now, so far it's not too dissimilar from the Versys 650 or the V-Strom 650, for example, but what sets the bike really apart is its impressive electronic feature set. Now the bike gets cruise control, something we see on very few motorcycles even now. ABS is cornering setup. The bike has an up and down quick shifter, apparently built in, and you get the added convenience, the dubious added convenience of keyless ignition. AI powered voice control, although that could be interesting because you'll need a connected helmet for that presumably. We do get a built-in dash cam. But for me, the most interesting addition is the blind spot radar. Now, there are no details as to how it does alert the rider, but it does make the machine one of the most technically advanced at its price point. How much does it cost? Well, the Chinese market price translated to euros comes in at around £6,200. Now, no idea if it's coming to the UK, even with the inevitable price hike which would bring it to our shores. It still would look like something of a bargain when you consider that the new Transalp is the wrong side of £10,000. Now, I've never really been a fan of customs and cruisers generally, but a new bike from Bender I think probably sets incredibly low standards for nice looking motorcycles. It's a bobber. This is the bike involved. I just about found the photo of it. There it is. It's called the Napoleon, and why on earth This monstrosity is called Napoleon. I have no idea. I can imagine Napoleon, former emperor of the French, of course, spinning in his grave looking at something like that. Now the machine is powered by a 488 liquid cooled fuel injected V-twin, and it pumps out about 50 horsepower. It's said to be a relatively lightweight, 190 kilograms, which is 418 pounds, and although Bender don't say if that's wet or dry, with the fairly likely limited fuel capacity, it won't go up too much if it is minus the gas. Now pricing for the Bender has not yet been announced, but it's interesting to say that the bike will be out by the end of the coming month, and it probably does make some sense in terms of the Chinese market, where riders do tend to be a little bit shorter. It's destined for Asia generally, I think. And the other thing to say is that Bender actually has a European dealer network. So if the Napoleon gets cut down to the 46.6 35 kilowatt limit for the A2 licensing regulations, we could well see it here, and it would probably suit lady riders too, if you can stomach the styling. Right, okay, on to the final part of today's show, the discussion point. Now, I mentioned earlier on that there was a campaign in place in Warwickshire to make motorcycling safer, and here's how they're doing it. The Warwickshire Road Safety Partnership are resorting to the old formula of putting up 100 signs, a mix of rider warning signs saying ride safely and basically telling riders to take extra care, and signs aimed at the driver telling them to look for motorcyclists by thinking twice and looking twice. Now, Warwickshire has, according to its website, no less than 2,421 miles of maintained roads, and it's pretty damn obvious that if only 100 odd signs are going to be put up right across the county, they're going to be pretty widely scattered if placed at random. So I wasn't surprised when I read the report, and it was said that they were going up on, quote, some of the most popular motorcycle routes through the county, and several of the routes that were quoted were roads like the A426, the Foss Way, and the A423. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at how the routes get chosen. So over to Sally Rolfe. She put the signs up along with her fellow Warwickshire Police Traffic and Management Advisor, PC Grant Dumbleton, and she said, quote, the routes for the signage were carefully chosen, taking into consideration both our latest casualty statistics and the number of motorcyclists using the route. So I want to just emphasise latest casualty stats. She continued, one of the top 5 routes on paper was the A426 from Rugby to the A5, but when we looked at this we found it already has a trial average speed camera system on the route. Now that itself is an interesting observation, since the implication is that speed must be a significant factor in bike casualties, whether it's speeding by drivers or speeding by motorcyclists. So I turned to Google Maps and I had a quick look at the route in question, and here it is. Just zoom in on that a little bit. So basically it starts near Rugby, and it's mostly dual carriageway, so it starts down here at the bottom of the map, and it trends up to the top right, and you can see it crosses the M1 at a certain point. So here's where it starts, down here. Whoops, that's the wrong picture's just popped up. Let's get back to the one that I wanted. I don't know how we skipped there. There it is. So that's where it starts, down here. And as you can see, it goes through the edges of Rugby and then through the suburbs, out through industrial area. There's the M6, and then it goes single track and it crosses some fields, and eventually it gets to the A5. So it's not a long stretch of road, and it runs mostly as a commuter route connecting two different main roads. If you carried on across the A5, you'd get to the M1 in not too difficult. journey. It looks pretty heavily trafficked, looking at the data, the figures, the photos on Google Maps. So, right, the first thing to say about that is that I would argue that that's not a motorcycle hooning road. It's actually the kind of road that probably sees a lot of commuting. Motorcyclists would tend to stay off it even at weekends, and I would be expecting, given particularly south of the M6 junction there's a whole raft of roundabouts on the route and junctions with the road, I would expect commuting accidents to dominate the figures. So, alright, what did I find when I looked at the crash stats? Well, the answer is, that's pretty much what I found. I used the collision plot tool. I looked at all the motorcycle crash data from 2012 to 2021 that resulted, first of all, in serious and fatal injuries. And here's what I found. Remember that they were talking about latest casualty stats. I found 0 fatal crashes in 10 years of data. And I found only 8 serious injury crashes across that data from 2012 to 2021. And those crashes involved one single solo motorcycle. 7 of them were car-bike collisions. And this is where it gets interesting, because this kind of supports what immediately I thought about this road. 5 of those collisions happened on or very close to roundabouts, and 1 occurred at a crossroads where, presumably looking at the diagram, the rider was actually on the priority road. Now, 1 happened near an underbridge, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. Another happened on the fast approach to the M6 intersection, so again, not quite sure what happened there. Maybe somebody ran into the back of a queue, maybe they were hit from behind by another driver slowing for the queue. Without the full data, I can't tell. The solo single crash appears to have involved a rider who overcooked it at a roundabout, probably going round it too fast and running wide into a traffic island. Now add in the minor injuries and the picture becomes even clearer. There were 9 more collisions on the roundabouts. There was 1 collision with a car on a straightish bit of road on where the rider was approaching a roundabout on the single carriageway stretch, so maybe he was filtering, who knows. 2 were at the same traffic signal controlled junction. 1 rider apparently collided with a cyclist, 1 collided with a pedestrian, and just 1 rider fell off solo, apparently coming off a roundabout. Now, so, you know, as I said, my first impression is that this wasn't a hooning road, and I expected commuter crashes, and I would suggest that that 10 years of data supports that, even though I haven't got the pay-to-view access to get the full package, and I can't give you any more details about exactly what happened. I could go and look at that if I paid for it, I guess. But since car-bike collisions are generally look but fail to see incidents where the driver fails to spot the bike, though it doesn't necessarily mean, as I explain in Science of Being Seen, that the rider had nothing to do with the crash, I'd say it's unlikely that the riders were doing anything particularly wild. So if you asked me, I would have said that that road would have been a great candidate for a bunch of think bike signs aimed at drivers. And I completely fail to understand how the average speed cameras, which were mentioned as being a reason for not putting up the signs, are going to have any impact at all on the kind of crashes that happen on that road, which major around the junctions and the roundabouts, because average speed cameras aren't going to affect what happens on roundabouts, are they? So let's move on. Having ruled that road out for whatever their reasons were, where did they go next? So back to Sally Rolfe, and she said, so we chose the next route down on our list, the A425 from Southam to the Northamptonshire border. Now this is a stretch, I looked at the map, of around 7 miles of road, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence, it's just 1 digit removed from the A426. I'm sure they just weren't working along a numerical list of roads. So anyway, I did the same. I went to Google Maps and I had a look at the road in question, and here it is. Now it, as you can see, it runs through the middle of the diagram there, the photo, there is Southam, and as you can see it starts with a roundabout, it runs out through the outskirts of Southam, and then it turns into a main road running through fields. There is one crossroads here, and then eventually it runs through a little village there, and eventually it crosses over into the Northants border and out of Warwickshire's responsibility. So there's the road. It's mostly a fairly fast looking and probably quite busy A road, which runs mostly through fields for most of its length. The road's widen improved looking at the street map view, at least on the western end, and I would guess that in fact this was an improved bypass built to bypass the older road. It also appears to have a 50 limit on the more open stretch, which usually implies a fair amount of lorry traffic, because the lower limit allows other traffic to travel at the same speed as the trucks, so it tends to minimize overtaking, which is where these accidents tend to happen on these roads. So photo off. Back to collision plot to see what was happening on that road. So as before, what I did was I set the thing to look for serious and fatal accidents involving motorcycles, and I set the data to look at the 10 years from 2012 to 2011. So how many fatalities were there? Well, again, there were just none, absolutely zero fatalities. How many serious injuries were there? Well, there was one. And where was it? Well, this is where it happened. I dug out the location. I had a look at the accident scene. So here it is. That is the place where the accident happened. It happened back in 2015. And if I had to guess, I would suggest that the rider probably overcooked the bend. It is actually in a 30 limit, but it is a fairly sharp kink. And I would guess that possibly the rider coming the other way overcooked it and ended up in the hedge on the left outside the house there. If the incident had been caused by a car turning in or out of one of the driveways, there would have been a car recorded on the accident report, and there wasn't. The only fatality that happened on that road was actually over the border in Northamptonshire in 2017. It involved 3 cars and a motorcycle, and unfortunately the rider died. Now, even when I added in the minor injuries over the 10-year period, there were just 2 additional crashes, both of which involved cars. One was just short of a junction coming into Southam. Maybe the bike ran into the back of a decelerating car. I don't know. Maybe the bike was hit from behind as it slowed for a queue. Who knows? The other was out on an open stretch of road, but it happened right next to a farm bed and breakfast at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. So my guess would be that most likely somebody was turning in or out of the BMW. So just 4 injury crashes over 10 years. So why was that road selected? I have no idea. It's certainly not a standout on the crash data, that's for sure. Maybe it's a road with a lot of speeding, either directly observed by the police or in fact leading to convictions. Maybe it's public complaints about rider behaviour. And something about the mention of enforcement later on in the press release actually made me think that maybe it's speeding by motorcycles that could be influencing, or maybe it just carries a lot of riders going about their business and not doing anything particularly bothersome, which makes it a good place to put the signs up to show to the riders. But there certainly doesn't seem to be anything supporting the idea that there were casualties that needed addressing. Sally Rolfe went on to say, quote, "When we were out putting up the signage, we were reassured to see high volumes of motorcycles using these roads. This confirmed we had chosen the right routes. Saw a lot of motorbikes? Chosen the right routes after the event? My guess is that they were looking for roads with lots of bikes and not much else. But after all, you know, confirming after the event isn't exactly going to convince me as much planning in these interventions. And my real worry is that if the signs go up where lots of riders see them, as opposed to roads where lots of drivers and riders get things wrong, they could be counterproductive, particularly for the bikers. Now, most riders aren't stupid. If they see signs warning of a dangerous stretch of road ahead, most of us will heighten our level of awareness. But if you see a ride safely sign on what is pretty obviously an innocuous stretch of road, and you keep seeing these signs on what appear to be pretty innocuous stretches of road, doesn't mean that accidents don't happen, but it means that our attention level will tend to go the other way. We'll start ignoring the signs, and then when we should have paid attention to one, when it really matters, we'll likely miss it. And that's a real problem, in fact, because that's exactly the rider perception of a lot of bend warning signs. They ask why they're put up, because I don't really understand. Nobody actually explains outside of my survival skills courses why bend warning signs are there, and of course riders then tend to ignore them and say they're causing false alarms. So where do crashes happen? Well, I do actually have a map which covers part of the area, so let's have a quick look at it. There it is. Now I will be this big blob here is actually Coventry, and that is outside the Warwickshire area. It's in a different county, but if you look at the other map, the other side of the map here, you will see Rugby, and you will see that again within the urban area the accidents are clustered. Now, one of the other roads that was mentioned as being worthy of intervention was the Foss Way, and that is this road here, the dead straight Roman road that runs across the map in that direction. You can see there have been some incidents there, including a couple of fatalities in the 10 years. Anyway, okay. Just in case you're thinking that, of course, all that Warwickshire Road Safety Partnership were doing was posting up signs. They are telling riders to get geared up, they are telling riders to take extra training, and of course they are warning us that Warwickshire Police will be out carrying regular high visibility patrols. There will be mobile camera sites on these routes, and they'll be placed there with priority throughout the summer, looking for motorcyclists presumably. Right, I'm out of time for today, but I do have more to say on this topic next Sunday, when I'll take a look at the way they actually analyse data, where they take short baselines, just a couple of years, when numbers are slow, and why making a decision based on a couple of years worth of data is actually pretty pointless and probably a waste of resources. That's the best case scenario. At worst, it's misleading to everybody. And just before I go, a quick reminder, if you've got Eurosport, you are missing the Spa 24-hour endurance race. It's part of the 4-round World Championship. It's a beautiful circuit, even with the remodelling that's been done to bring top-class racing back to the circuit for 2 and 4 wheels. And if you can ever make it over there to watch a race, it really is worth the visit. There's quite a lot of events over there run by the Belgian Motorcycle Federation. So Spa, wonderful place to go watch racing. If you can't watch it live, you can always pop over to Eurosport and watch it there. Sue says thank you, nice to see you, Sue. Thanks for looking in. There's about 4 hours of the race left right now, so once again to everybody, thank you for looking in, always appreciated. Do spread the word, tell people about the show, remind them that it is available on catch up if they didn't catch it live, and tell them about all the interesting stuff that I talk about, bikes, riding, and the in-depth investigations into some of the things that perhaps we would be better informed if police and road safety partnerships took a little bit more time to think about what they're doing. If you are out there on the bike today, do remember the weather and do stay shiny side up.